Welcome to Wednesday night, Lee's Grove. Let's all stand and worship. We all get to
Good evening, Lees Grove. That's going to be my new call signal, I think. Robin Williams did Hello Vietnam. I'm going to do Hello Lees Grove. Who's back there? Jesse. We're going to be in the book of Esther, and I'm going to read New Living Translation. Battling a fly up here. I love to hear women pray, and men too, but my little niece, Adeline, she goes by Addie, was asked to sing at her little brother's preschool pre-K graduation, and they put my sister, her grandma, sent me the video, and then they put it on Facebook, but she sang The Power of a Praying Woman, and it was just beautiful. It touched my heart. Praying grandmas can heal ears, can't we? Praying grandmas can do a lot of things. All right. The book of Esther. How many feel like you are familiar with the book of Esther, that you know it very well? Anybody? No? Good. I've read it so many times in my life that I felt like I knew it well until I studied it, and then ran across a lot of things that I had forgotten, or that maybe I didn't take account of when I was reading it before. It's an interesting book. We're going to start chapter 1, verse 1, and go through the whole book. I won't get through it all tonight, I'm sure, but I'll continue next time. Why is this book important? It's an Old Testament book. It's about a queen. Why is it important? Well, you'll hear, or you might read, or you might see that God isn't mentioned in the book of Esther. There's no place in the book of Esther when God speaks to this person and directs them, or God shows this or any of that. But in the book of Esther, we see God working behind the scenes. We see how God puts people in the right place at the right time, and we see how God can use insignificant people in significant events. And I just think there's a lot to learn about this. I'm going to pass around this little sheet. This is the Persian Empire. Now, King Xerxes, it's spelled Xe or Xes, but it's pronounced as Z, Xerxes. He was the king during this time of the Persian Empire. And I'll just pass this around, but he was king from India over here all the way to Ethiopia over here. And so massive amount of land that he was king over. And I highlighted a couple of the places that we're going to talk about: Media there, and Persia, which we just talked about Iran in our prayers. Iran used to be Persia. So when we talk about Persia, we're talking about what is now Iran. So I'm just going to pass this around. I like visuals, and I just think that it helps to have an idea of where, what part of the world we're talking about. It might not matter to you, and I am not a history buff by any means. I do not love history like Andy and Katie Cole do. I hated it in school, but now as we study the Bible, it becomes a little more important. So King Esther, another reason that it's important to study her is because she saved her people. She saved her Jewish people. And we know how important the Jewish people are to God, were to God then, and still are to God now. So the major people in the book of Esther, before we start reading, I already mentioned King Xerxes, and he has another name in the King James Version. Let me see if I can pronounce this. I wrote it here somewhere. Ahasuerus. I'm going to call him Xerxes, if that's all right with y'all. His wife was Queen Vashti. She was beautiful, beautiful woman. She was his wife, his queen. Esther, who the book's named after, she was also beautiful. A young lady. She was Jewish, and she was an orphan. She would later become queen, and like I said earlier, she would ultimately save her people. Mordecai is a cousin of Esther. He's more of a father figure, though, because like I said, she was an orphan, and he took her into his family, kind of adopted her in, so he became like a father to her, loved her very much. And he's also a palace official. He's working in the palace there. where she goes to live. And then Haman, he was the king's right-hand man. He was a high-ranking official who wants to annihilate the Jews, hates the Jews because he hates Mordecai, and he wants to wipe them out. So let's get started. Like I said, I'm reading the NLT version. It reads just like a chapter book. If you want to follow, fine. If you want to listen to me, Jesse got it up there? No? Verse 1, chapter 1. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia, that I've marked there. At the time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. Susa was the capital city of Persia. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers, I'm going to read through verse 8, all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces. This celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. So they went from having a banquet to having another banquet. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver rings embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. Wow. Partying for 180 days. Can you imagine how much that cost? Just the food and wine alone. Miss Linda Parnell, I thought of you when I was reading the description of all those beautiful decorations. I think you could have got into that and helped them decorate with all the beautiful things they had there. Like I said, the fortress of Susa, and I've got it marked there on that handout, it was the capital of Persia. It was in the southwestern part of Iran. And Media was in the northwestern part of Iran. So 180 days, 6 months, they had a banquet. And they partied and they drank as much as they wanted. And then he gave another banquet for the people just there in Susa. 7 days. He was a wealthy man, right? He was a wealthy man. Drinks were served with no limit. And then let me read verse 9. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. Now, it was during that time, it was common for men and women to have separate banquets. I personally don't want to be around a bunch of men that have been drinking for 180 days. Do y'all? And so the women were safer to be contained in their own banquet there. So she had a feast for them. The women were safe, and it was kind of a more dignified space for them. You know, if you've ever been around a drunk, things can get rowdy quick. Language, colorful jokes, shall we say. And so she gave a separate banquet. All right, so let's go now. Anybody got any comments, anything they want to say so far? Please jump in if you do. All right, let's go now. I'm going to read, starting at verse 10. On the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him, Mehulam, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. Were y'all impressed by that? I had to study and look up how to pronounce names, and I probably still botched some of them. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the king's orders to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Let me stop there for a minute. So wine in the Bible, you know, that often symbolizes joys. We talked about symbols the last time that I spoke, and I don't know if wine was one of them. I don't think so. But, you know, wine in the Bible, it's also used at, you know, happy events. Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine, right, at the wedding. But we know, like I said, if you've ever been around a drunk or lived with a drunk, drinking leads to foolish decisions, right? Then as much as now. The king wanted to parade his beautiful wife around. You know, he's got a bunch of drunk men here, and he's probably telling them how beautiful she is and all that. And he wanted her to come out and just show them how beautiful his wife was, but she refused. She had the right to do that, but it embarrassed the king and it angered him. So let's see what he does about it. Verse 13, he immediately consulted with his wise advisors who knew all the Persian laws and customs, for he always asked their advice. The names of these men were Karshena, I can't read my writing, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, 7 nobles of Persia and Media. They met with the kings regularly and held the highest positions to the empire. What must be done to Queen Vashti, the king demanded? What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through the eunuchs? Memucan answered the king and his nobles, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. Sounds like a women's movement, don't it? Is this where it started? These bunch of drunks sitting around talking about, well, Queen Vashti, you know, she don't do what she's supposed to do. Women everywhere then will revolt. All right, so 19. So if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. Well, that plan backfired on us, didn't it, girls? The king and his nobles throughout this thought this made good sense. So he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleased. That's where we got that from. No, just kidding. All right. So like I said, these men have been partying for 187 days. Was this their finest decision? Probably not. But God moves in mysterious ways, and this set the stage for Esther for her arrival. All right, so anybody want to add anything so far? If not, we're going to go on to chapter 2. Chapter 2. But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Oh, another fine idea. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. In English it's Jair. In Hebrew it's Yair. The J is pronounced with a Y. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family, who among those who, with King Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember that in our Sunday school class? We studied Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who is also called Esther, When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Heggai's care. Heggai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids, especially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and the maids into the best palace in the harem. All right, so why eunuchs? I had that question. Why were eunuchs in charge of the women? Well, obviously, I'm assuming everybody knows what a eunuch is. Obviously, they were considered no threat to the beautiful women in the harem. It was thought that their desires, like after you have a dog fix that, maybe they lay around and they're lazy, and didn't really pursue women. At the very least, they could not have a child with any of the royalty or anyone in the harem, so there was no worry about that. And they were often put in high-ranking jobs as a result of being a eunuch, maybe to make up for the horror they went through in becoming one. But from what I read, this was mostly done when they were babies, I hope. Anyway, beauty treatments the women were offered. Wow, 12 months of beauty treatment. So they were kept away from the king until they were groomed and given all these beauty treatments. It said the first 6 months was myrrh. Maybe we need to order a case from Amazon, I don't know. Heggai took a liking to Esther, and when have I got down that far yet? I don't know if I have. Let me go back and read there. Let me go back to 10. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. Every day Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. Here we come. 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it's time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. I would have loaded up with pearls. That evening, she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of, I did not look up how to say his name. Let's call him Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his young cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Heggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasions, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving numerous gifts. I suspect that God was moving there. Of all the beautiful women who've been brought before him now, he immediately said, "She's my queen." And perhaps she was beautiful, but just like that, was that a coincidence? I think not. Even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions just as she did when she lived at home. All right, let's see where my notes are. So Heggai, the eunuch, took special care of her, and she must have just been a humble person because when she found out she could take any clothes, any jewelry she wanted, she deferred to him. What do you think I should wear? What do you think I should do? And she followed his example. Apparently, she was well raised. She didn't divulge who she was or what her religion or nationality was, because Mordecai told her not to. And she followed the rules of Haggai, and, you know, evidently was just a humble person, so that says a lot about her right there. So her obedience was rooted in trust. She trusted those who were in charge of her. She respected them. And all this set the stage for her role later in saving the Jews. Mordecai had, you know, obviously instructed her to honor the king, and that aligns with honoring authority in the higher court. You know, we don't have to like our leaders, but we're supposed to respect them. Even if we don't vote for them, we're supposed to pray for them. You know, everything we see is bashing the president or the vice president or Congress or certain senators or whatever. And, you know, we don't know their hearts. It's not our job to judge them. You know, President Trump will say, I'm praying about this situation. Is he really? I don't know. But that's not my business. That's between him and God. You know, what I can do is pray for him and pray that God gives him wisdom and that God instructs him and leads him, and that God takes charge and that God's in control of the decisions that are made and that kind of thing. You know, modern day leaders, just like all through time, you know, they may lie through their teeth. All we can do is pray for spiritual guidance and wisdom and discernment. And like I said, for God to intervene and take control. All right, where are we? All right, I'm going to read 21 through 23, not as much this time. One day, as Mordecai was on duty at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthana and Teresh, who were guards at the door of the king's private quarters, became angry at King Xerxes and plotted to assassinate him. But Mordecai heard about the plot and gave the information to Queen Esther. She then told the king about it and gave Mordecai credit for the report. When an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the two men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. That's important. That's going to come up again in a little bit. So a little bit of a turn there. We quit talking about Esther for a minute and talking about Mordecai doing this noble thing. All right, let's see. So he basically saved the king's life. His deed was recorded in a permanent record there. And like I said, it's going to pop up again in a minute. Anybody have anything to add? Anything they want to throw in? I love for y'all to participate and add in something that I don't know. A lot of wise people in here tonight. Anybody? All right, so we'll go on. Now we're going to turn to Haman. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for the king had commanded that. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews through the entire empire of Xerxes. That tells us a lot about Haman right there, don't it? He's not just going to take revenge on Mordecai for dishonoring him, going to annihilate his whole, everybody, all the Jews. You know, he had gotten a promotion. That had to go to his head right there, right? Now, we know a little bit now what kind of person he was. And the king had commanded everybody to bow to him, and Mordecai refused. Now, what nationality was Esther again? She was a Jew, so this is affecting her, right? So, yep, it's going to affect her. Let's see. All right, let's move on. Starting at verse 7. So in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence. The lots were called Purim, Purim. That's going to come up again later. To determine the best day and month to take action, and the day selected was March 7th. Danny Coates. Nearly a year later, that's Danny's birthday and our wedding anniversary. Easiest for to remember when Purim is. Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, there's a certain race of people. Look how snide he is now, how sneaky he is. There's a certain race of people scattered throughout the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from anyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it please the king, issue a decree that they can be destroyed, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administrators to be deposited in the royal treasury. The king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. The king said, the money and the people are both yours to do as you see fit. Was the king distracted here? What was going on with him? Did he trust Haman that much that when Haman came in and said, hey, there's people spread all across the country that don't need to live. Here, take my ring, send a decree, kill them all. What was he thinking? And like I said, did he trust Haman that much? Well, that's going to turn around in a little while. So on April 17th, the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Haman dictated. It was sent to the king's highest officers, the governors of the respective provinces, and the nobles of each province in their own script and languages. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's ring. Dispatchers were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. This was scheduled to happen on Danny's birthday, March 7th, of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. Remember that now. That's going to come up again, too. If you kill a Jew, you're entitled to whatever they have. You can take their property. All right. So lots were cast to determine what day to take action. And the lots were called Purim. Like I said, that's going to come back up. The decree was written and sealed with the king's ring. Now, at that time, once something was decreed and sealed with the ring, it could not be reversed. It had to go as decreed. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was done. It was law. So all Jews, not just the men, not just those who might threaten the kingdom, not just Mordecai's family, men, women, and children, were all to be killed the next March 7th. And then it says, Haman and the king sat down to drink again. All right. So on to chapter 4. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. That reminds me there of Job a little bit. He went as far as the gate of the palace, and for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was a great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, they wept and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. Tearing his clothes, of course, is called renting your clothes. You do that when you're in mourning. Burlap, again, was clothes of mourning. And like I said, if you approached the palace and you were in mourning clothes, you could not go into the gate to enter the palace. So when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She didn't know what was going on. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. In other words, she sent him clothes so he could come into the palace, maybe talk to her and to find out what was going on. But he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why. He was in mourning. So Hathach went to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Mordecai told him the whole story. including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave him a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked him to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked him to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the kings and officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So he gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Weird laws, right? But when the king was on his throne in the inner courts, you could not enter unless you were invited. If he wanted you in there, he'd call for you. If you went in there, it could be off with your head. You just like that. Didn't matter if it was a queen. Didn't matter who it was. If you were not invited, you were not to go. So that's the first thing Esther thought of. I can't do any good if I'm dead. And I can't go to him without being invited. And she said he hadn't sent for me for 30 days. So, maybe his feelings sort of had changed. Maybe she wouldn't be able to convince him of anything if she did go. But Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. I love this next sentence. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Who knows if you were brought to Lee's Grove for just such a time as this? Who knows if you were called by the Lord for just such a time as this? When Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So again, she listened to Mordecai. He told her what to do, and she did it. Can you imagine the devastation and the despair among the Jews? They were laying around weeping and crying and wailing because it's been decreed that they're going to be killed. Not just the men, like I said. Everybody. So we read the back and forth between Mordecai and Esther. He couldn't come in the palace because he had on his mourning clothes, but he told the eunuch to tell her to go to the king and beg. She sent back word, I can't. I could be killed. And he sent back, do you think because you're in the palace you're going to be exempt? Once Haman found out she was a Jew, that was going to be it for her. She knew she had to take action. One way or another, she was going to die, whether she did nothing or whether she did. Was she scared? Of course. Of course she was scared. But this showed her faith. She asked for praying and fasting. She didn't say, everybody run hide, get out of the country. She asked for praying and fasting, and she said, I will do it myself, and I'll have my maids do it. Now, they weren't even Jewish, maybe. It doesn't say. But she knew that there was power in prayer. She knew that there was power in numbers. And she knew that God answered prayers. He can use ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, can't he? Just think of the ordinary people in the Bible he used. Think of poor Paul. Well, I say poor Paul now. Paul, look how, we all know how Paul started out. And look at the turnaround in Paul's life and how God used him. Moses had a speech problem, and he tried to use that as an excuse, and God said, well, I'll send your brother to speak for you. If there's something he wants you to do, he's going to make a way for us to do it. Okay, I think we will go through 5 there, and then I will stop, and next time it's my turn, if I'm allowed back up here, I'll finish up. All right, so we're having another feast. Chapter 5. On the third day of the feast, Esther put on her royal robes and entered the inner court of the palace just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out the gold scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. I love this part. Then the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What's your request? I'll give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." Methinks he was smitten with her, don't you think? You know, he ain't called on her for 30 days. We don't know why. But he's offered her half the kingdom. And Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I've prepared for the king." The king turned to his attendant and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me, what do you really want? What's your request? I'll give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." He told her again. Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. If I found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about." Did she lose her nerve? Sounds like maybe she did. You know, she's smart. She gets them together, just those two in with her. You know, she didn't run into court when he held his scepter and she touched it and he said, "What do you want? I'll give you whatever you want." She didn't blab and say, "Haman's going to kill me. You know, Haman's going to wipe out the Jews. You got to do something." She used the old noggin. She had prayed and fasted. She was ready. God was telling her what to do. Verse 9, Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. But then he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him. Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, and boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. He bragged about the honors the king had given him and how he had been promoted over all the nobles and officials. And then Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us, and she's invited for me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow." And then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate." So Haman's brilliant wife, I threw that in, Zeresh, and all his friends suggested, "Set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall, and in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king." This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. So Haman's pretty proud of himself right now. He's been invited to 2 banquets, just him and the king. You know, he don't really know what's going on, but he's happy about it. And so we will see next time what happened. And I think I've got my notes wrong here. Hold on just one second. I want to throw a few things in when I find my right page. Does anybody remember this scripture so far? Is it ringing a bell? What's happening here? It's got a little bit of everything in it. It's got some intrigue in it. It's got some mystery. It's got a little bit of a love story in it. You know, do what? Whole lot of drinking going on. 6 months of it. 6 months of it so far. So, you know, God's got a plan here, and He's using Esther to bring out His plan. And, you know, she's showing courage. She's a young girl, maybe a teenager. You know, she's showing courage. She knows the laws, and she knows she can't go to the king, but she does it anyway. She's bold. And she prepares and seeks guidance and readiness before she took action. Her timing, you know, she knows when and how to act strategically. Again, I don't know if she lost her nerve that first time and invited them the second time. Yeah, a divine delay. Yep. And she was kind and generous, you know, please, if it please the king, and if he finds favor with me, you know, she didn't go in like I would, you know, kicking and fighting, saying, you know, y'all ain't gonna hurt my people. She went, if it pleased the king, you know, she was kind and generous. And then Haman's anger, that illustrates the dangers of unchecked negative emotions. You know, he's on a high when he comes out because he's had a private banquet with the king. And he sees this one man that he hates, you know, and it just destroys his whole demeanor. I read a little blurb today that said, I went to church and I was uplifted, and then I got in my car and got in traffic. You know? So we can, you know, be happy and high one minute, and then something makes us mad, and then it's gone, just like that. But Esther knew what she was doing, and we will pick up next time, if that's all right, at 7:25. Anybody got anything to add? I know Pastor Randy and Pastor Keith, y'all know more about this than I do. Y'all want to throw anything in?
Esther was born for that time.
Born for that time.
Born for this time.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So those of you that are streaming, Keith said Esther was born for this time, that each of us has got a job to do. And we have to be willing. You know, I think you can use anybody, but you got to be willing. You got to be willing. You got to say yes. And, you know, we got to do our part too. We got to put some preparation into it. We got to seek guidance, whether it's from the, you know, elders of our church or wise friends or the Bible, of course, and just prayer and meditation. We got to do our part too. And she did her part. I think she was just an outstanding young lady, and we're going to see what happens next time, see what the outcome was, and how, you know, like I said, God worked behind the scenes to save the Jews who they had already been exiled one time, and now this one man, lone man, wants to knock them out. We'll see what happens next time. Is that all right with everybody? Anybody else got anything to say? All right, let's close out. Our precious Lord and Heavenly Father, God, we just thank you for our time in your house tonight, God. I'm just so thankful to live in a country where we're free to come in and worship as we wish, God. And I thank you for being present. And Lord, as we go our separate ways, Lord, I ask that you keep us safe and that you stay foremost in our minds and in our hearts, God, and that we look to you for the answers to many of our questions, that we seek you when we need wisdom and guidance, Lord. And we thank you for putting people in our way, Lord, and putting people in our path that can help us and that can help us accomplish what you have for us to do. And I thank you sincerely for that. I ask you to be with us now again as we go our separate ways. Bring us back to your house on Sunday. And Lord, we just can't thank you enough for your grace and mercy. Amen.